working on this. Thank you for recording, Anna. Have been working on this project since then. They had meetings with communities and other stakeholders in November, December, and January. Many of you were in that, or somebody from your staff was at those meetings. We were able to send you out something at the beginning of April that was a kind of initial feedback document. But now we're ready to share with you an overview of the business plan. And we really appreciate you being here. We are going to get started with our next slide, Anna, please. We're going to just give you some background that Josh Akers will take you through. Then Evan Absher with Focus Capital will provide information about the feedback that we heard from not only you, but other folks, go over the business plan. And then Amanda Wilson with LISC Greater Kansas City, who is our partner in the Regional Housing Partnership, will be talking about next steps, as well as me kind of wrapping up with next steps and then opening it up to questions. If you have questions, please put those in the chat for us. Anna will be monitoring those. So I will go ahead and hand it over to Josh. Thanks.
I will unmute myself and talk to you again. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I think most of you are probably familiar with marc.org/housing, but that's where we're keeping a housing data hub that gives you access to census data and other forms of data around housing for each of your communities. In addition to that, as part of the research housing partnership, or as part of the regional housing partnership, we've also been doing data analysis and background and education to understand where the region's at. And I think this has been very important in terms of setting the stage, understanding the ground on which we're working here, and what this is, the importance of this fund. So it's clear from the research that the region needs more housing and more price points in more places. There's over 200,000 households currently cost burden, are paying 30% or more of their income in housing and utilities in the region. Even if we were to wave a magic wand and match units to income, there's 64,000 households in the region that cannot find affordable housing or housing that would be less than 30% of their income. At the same time, since the financial crisis in 2008, new development has not kept up with regional growth. You can find new analysis from us on that. But essentially, we're missing up to 24,000 housing units. They're just not there. Housing that should have been built in comparison to households that we have. Next slide, please. So on the affordable side, overall, supply is lacking for both owners and renters. There's limited supply and vacancy, and this is putting upward pressure on rents. Rising rents and limited income growth has equaled a greater number of cost-burdened households in the region. Cost-burdened households are forced to make difficult choices between necessities like meals and healthcare, and cost-burdened households are unable to respond to unexpected expenses, so putting their housing in jeopardy. As you said, so there's 64,000 units there that are 64,000 households, particularly low income, that cannot find units they can afford and are forced to make choices on a regular basis between staying in their house and feeding themselves. Next slide, please. So we need to connect both housing production broadly, right? We need affordable housing, but we need more housing all over the place. So we're missing as many as 24,000 units of housing. That market has been out of equilibrium since the financial crisis in 2008. Closing this gap is going to require that we nearly double current annual production levels. And a production gap is a driver in that affordability gap that we just talked about. So that is where we're at. And I will turn it over to who's next.
Evan?
Sorry, I didn't hear. Here. Thanks, Josh. Appreciate that. Laying the groundwork. I think it leads directly into the feedback we got from all of you and developers and housing advocates across the region. Obviously Josh is talking, and MARC's research is at the regional level, but as we discussed with different jurisdictions and different communities, it became very clear to us that this crisis manifests in different ways in different communities. So there are communities that are completely built out, and their young families or young or first-time homeowners can't get into their own communities because the homes are purchased at a price either too quickly or too high for those folks to get into homes. And homes that were once owned by a local resident are now being purchased by outside investors and converted into rentals. There are issues of just not enough housing. There are communities that have a lot of infill need and need to be building more affordable housing and just more product writ large. And so across the region, this mismatch of product to income level is persistent, but it's not the same in the communities. And so the approach has to take into account the different needs and dynamics going on in different communities, while at the same time solving for the underlying reality that there's just not enough housing for the levels of income and the community living, the people living in that community. One thing we did find and hear from everyone was the presence of private equity or outside investors or investment or cash or capital or people buying property for speculative purposes. This is an issue. It's becoming more of an issue in Kansas City. It's certainly not the same level as it is in Atlanta or Phoenix or other communities, but it is increasing. Josh again and Mark and Katie and the team at MARC are producing a lot of research on this issue. But really what's happening is private equity is more than likely exacerbating the housing crisis, but it isn't causing it. The cause is a lack of production. And private equity is taking advantage of that by being able to accumulate capital and move quickly and purchase homes and convert those into rentals. Another thing we heard was communities want to use housing as a way of sort of economic agency and engendering people into the sort of economic future of the community, wealth building. Housing is seen as more than just shelter. It's a way of getting people involved into the upside and the appreciation of the community as a whole, making them more concerned and involved citizens, making them more responsible, but also giving them some vested interest in the future of the community. And that's really important, I think, not just in the individual jurisdictions, but as the region as a whole. And we definitely heard back from communities and jurisdictions that there's tension sort of between the different communities on how much of a regional resource will go to that community, and then what's the responsibility of a community to bear in this. And I think that there's an opportunity to acknowledge that different jurisdictions and different communities are at a different place, but also potentially keep the resources, the public resources within that community applied to those citizens, applied to those constituents, and not have that same level of tension, regional tension that can sometimes crop up, and legitimately so, right? If we're talking about using public capital or public dollars to fund a regional initiative, it gets very difficult to reallocate those dollars appropriately. And so we heard that, and we think we've designed a solution, or we hope we've designed a solution to address that issue. But we also know that affordable housing is a hot button issue, and that affordable housing, when mentioned in every community, either elected or appointed officials mention the issue of sort of pushback from their constituents. And so we've taken to saying that this is a housing crisis, not an affordable housing crisis. As Josh and the MARC team showed earlier, the affordability or the housing issue is across the income spectrum. And so any sort of housing solution, especially the fund, should be intentionally addressing the spectrum of housing products that need to be brought online. And actually, we think that that's an advantage or potential advantage to a fund, is the fact that the need is across the spectrum. And so, one thing that I think the fund can provide or should provide that you all ask for is sort of air cover and political cover and sort of a bigger narrative around we're not just putting affordable housing in your backyard, we're dealing with a housing crisis across the region. And part of the benefit we're going to get from that is, we're going to have a more prosperous and inclusive community, but also our responsibility is to put in all different levels of kinds of products into our community. And that will include housing that's affordable and workforce and market rate housing. Okay, next slide. So we heard back from developers, they need a functional and comprehensible system for accessing concessionary capital. I think the biggest complaint we heard was LIHTC. Some communities have not received a LIHTC investment for years. The 9% LIHTC is competitive and isn't always awarded to certain communities, and the 4%, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, if you're in Missouri or Kansas, working with the housing authority dealing with that might be difficult. And increasingly in other states, the 4% cap, the private activity cap, is being hit. And maybe 4% doesn't quite make the deal pencil. And so then many LIHTC properties or investments or developments are seeking anywhere from 6 to 12 different sources of capital. Finally, research shows that LIHTC can cost up to 20% of the amount of capital you actually raise. Our friend Becca McQuillan has often said that LIHTC is a white-collar workforce program, jobs program. So, that's one salient example of sort of the frustration that developers feel when it comes to they want to do affordable housing, they want to meet the need, but the main source of concessionary capital, LIHTC, is difficult and competitive. So it's not always even awarded. And when they do get it awarded, it's not always helpful. Another issue that we found from developers was policy continuity between jurisdictions. This was a big issue. We know that this is a touchy issue, be it anywhere from sort of building standards and to zoning to permitting to whatever the case might be. There's definitely a lot of issues around not only the individual jurisdictions requirements, but also the difference between the jurisdictions, going from one to the other or managing the different jurisdictions. And so we think that there could be a lot of cost savings done in figuring out ways that we can have continuity. I won't say normalization or uniformity. That I don't think that's necessarily necessary to achieve cost savings, but I think some level of continuity could be really beneficial. I think the fund could help provide a carrot for different jurisdictions to say, hey, there's this big fund, and if we get our housing, zoning, permitting, licensing, all the land use regulation somewhere in the ballpark of the other jurisdictions, there could be some benefits for that. Cost control assistance, namely in the form of land acquisition, was a big issue for developers. And again, that's something that local jurisdictions can do depending on if you have a land bank or if you have control or if you own land or there are other things there that can be of assistance. And then, of course, community engagement regarding affordable housing. Again, this comes back to your all's issue, too, of the hot button issue around affordable housing and sort of the emotional response it will engender in your constituents. I think developers feel as though they can't, win for losing. They either build affordable housing and they get blown up by one set of the community, or they build market rate and they get sort of beat up by the other side of the community. And I think everybody just kind of wants to get a narrative out there that says, hey, we have a housing crisis. We need to be building housing across the income spectrum. And we all have a responsibility to take on affordable housing, but we also are going to benefit by getting more market rate and workforce housing. And if that's sort of the regional narrative and it's being shown that it doesn't, disrupt or change the character of a community, that would help everybody. And so that was something that developers also wanted help with it. And I'm sure we're not saying anything here that you haven't heard before, but I think the difference is taking there are ways that a regional approach can help alleviate these issues without getting into the regional dynamics of what money is going where. And so next slide. That leads to our recommendation. So first, I want to note, and I think this will be reiterated, One of the things we decided pretty early on in this process is that the business plan for regional fund would not take on uh, public dollars, would not ask the public entities to invest. First, because the issue of if one jurisdiction invests in the regional housing fund and the dollars go to another jurisdiction, it can be difficult, if not directly impermissible. And so that's something that we decided pretty early on. What would happen is the fund's approach would be to get parcels, to get units as affordable, to buy down the cost as much as possible. And then if individual jurisdictions want to further either expand the number of affordable units or deepen the affordability on individual units, it could apply incentives or public dollars or assistance to the individual projects at the project level within their jurisdiction. And that would make their assistance more efficient, but also keep their resources within their jurisdiction. It would also mean this, to the benefit of the fund, it would remain much more flexible and much more easily managed because it wouldn't be managing all the different jurisdictions' needs and requirements. It would just be saying to the individual communities and jurisdictions, hey, here's where we're at on the affordability. We feel like we've reached an affordability level that is appropriate for us and our mission and our mandate. And if you want to add affordability to that, you can. And we look forward to that. We obviously would support that. And I say we just because I'm taking the role of the fund here. But that is something that we should note right off the bat, that part of the business plan recommendation is this would be 100% private meaning philanthropic and commercial. So that's something there. The general approach we're going to take is we think a lot of the issues that are represented in the last few slides are actually opportunities. And so there is a diverse need of housing in all these communities, and that's actually really helpful because that allows us to cross-subsidize the fund to cross-subsidize between affordable and workforce at a regional level. So, and also affordable means something different in each community. So affordable in one community might be market rate in another. And so if a regional fund can invest in an affordable housing project over here at one expected rate of return and then subsidize a project in another community and still have it be counted as affordable in both of those communities, even though they're only 15 miles apart, that means that we've brought on two sets of affordable housing or workforce housing projects, but we've been able to cross-subsidize because one is going to be higher rent and higher return, and we've cross-subsidized and brought them both online when that wouldn't have happened before. And so that's a really important, I think, dynamic that the fund or the advantage that the fund has, which is it can take a regional approach. It can still fund a lot of affordable housing, but it does so by cross-subsidizing between different developments and different investments across the region because the region is not uniform. The Kansas City MSA affordable housing number is an aggregate of a massive area, but within that area, there's a lot of variance, and we should take advantage of that. Also, the fund will take advantage of the scale. The larger the fund size, the lower the cost of capital per dollar. And of course, that filters through and cost savings to the developers. And then, of course, finally redounds the residents living in the portfolio developments. Also, it's going to use philanthropic dollars in a patient and flexible way. And so, we've learned a lot from private equity and what they've done and the structures that they use. And we think actually we can replicate a lot of those to aggregate capital and move quickly. But instead of taking on private equity investors with a high expectation of return, the fund would leverage philanthropic investors with a low expectation of return to fill that role and provide a lot of patience and flexibility, but also ensure that local institutions and local organizations are in control and are keeping the fund accountable and responsive to the community as opposed to external investors that would only care about return. And then finally, the fund is designed in a way that over time it would encourage and engender ownership among the community, among community organizations, and the final terminal position of the fund would be owned and governed by more than just the philanthropic organizations here in town, but by all sorts of representatives and a broad spectrum of folks in the community. Next slide. Here are some of the details. I won't go through all of these. We submitted something like a 60-page business plan with two different large financial models, one for the fund and one for the individual financial products that would go out to the developers. There's a massive amount of work and thought that we put into this. But these are the high level sort of terms of the fund. It's ambitious, but we have an ambitious issue. We have a large issue, right? We need to be building double the rate we're building now. We're missing 24,000 units of affordable housing. We have a mismatch of 64,000 units. In the next 10 years alone, we're going to have 10,000 LIHTC units roll out of compliance with no plan on how we're going to preserve those and no cohesive strategy on how we're going to preserve those. And we need a fund like this one at this size to address that issue. And we think it's entirely possible. In the grand scheme of things, funds this size are not that large, or to commercial investors, to large private equity investors, this would not be a large fund. To us, it seems huge, but we need to take, I think, again, the mindset of we have a large issue, we need to have an ambitious solution. And so I can go in more details, but the common equity, the thing to keep in mind here is the common equity at $100 million. That's the initial raise from the local philanthropic investors to begin the process of building out a large fund that could then raise more capital from outside commercial investors, but maintain mission fidelity and focus on affordable housing and housing in Kansas City. As you can tell, we expect to build or preserve 164,000 units over the course of 20 years, with affordable units, 51,000 affordable units being built or preserved. Yeah, that's I think the next slide is the picture to show how the fund works. So this is just a basic high-level outline of how the fund would work. The fund would offer, ways for philanthropic and commercial investors to get involved. That's how we create impact, but also capital scale. The fund would then invest in housing. The rent would pay the fund back, and that would be its return. And then over time, the fund would also share essentially with the community. And we won't go into that today, but it is intentionally built out that it is possible for the fund to include community organizations and members into the ownership. With that, I will throw it over to Amanda.
Hey everybody, Amanda Wilson. I'm a senior program officer at LISC Greater Kansas City. Thanks for joining us. So next steps, Evan, was talking about a pretty ambitious approach that we're excited about and that we think is needed. But next step is to create a pilot of this. So this pilot fund will initially invest in like 2 to 4 specific projects around the region of different types of projects. And that is, we will be making those investments through this raise of initial startup capital that, as Evan said, is from local philanthropy. So using those dollars to build the infrastructure of what the REIT will look like and entail, and using this as the model, and then investing in specific projects. And then as we invest in these projects, we're testing the model as we're going, testing all of our pro forma numbers and assumptions and making sure that, this is solid. And then if we need to make any adjustments, we do that before we raise commercial capital. So this pilot phase is the next part. And then once we do that and build this infrastructure, invest in specific projects, then we'll be raising the commercial capital and officially launching the fund for developers all across the region of all types of development. So we will be reaching out to all of you whenever we have updates, and especially when this formal fund will be launched. We'll, of course, be making updates on our website, kcrhp.org, for Kansas City Regional Housing Partnership. There is a section on there at the bottom to sign up for the newsletter and get that if you're already not signed up. All of our local jurisdictions will be on our list to reach out to, and as well as developers, banks, affordable housing nonprofits. We have a whole long list, but as you are talking to potential developers, be keeping this in the back of your mind, just of how this may support some of the work that you see going on in your jurisdictions. And yeah, we will be sharing more information as we have it and as it comes. So thanks for being here. And I think Katie is going to talk about other next steps.
So just to touch on a few things that Evan brought up when he was presenting, how can communities, since the request is not really to fund this fund, how can communities come alongside and really help with the fund making the impact that we hope that it will? Some of that is what, as Evan explained, was bringing along your own incentives and financing tools alongside the projects that would be coming to the fund to receive dollars from it or products from it. Additionally, looking at your land use, zoning, and development processes really to foster more housing development in general across the region. And something I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of while we're talking about the housing fund, the Regional Housing Partnership Strategy Committee has been really looking at where are we headed for the next body of work. And one of those areas is very much clued into helping communities have resources to do this kind of work, looking at best practices. And so that is built into our next phase of work to come alongside with you and help you with that research as well. If you remember, many of you have heard that we applied for a HUD Pro housing grant. We just received news about a week or two ago that we did not receive that, but we are still looking at other ways to get that part off the ground because we see it as critical, helping you as this fund is also coming online. And then finally, as Amanda shared, making sure as you're having your conversations with developers, as there is more information of where they can go to access this fund, getting that information out to them as well. So those are some of the next steps of how communities can continue to help with this process, even though there is no real financial ask directly into the fund. So I just want to wrap up by saying that we will have this recording. I believe Amanda plans to put it on the RHP website that she mentioned in her last one, as well as emailing this out to anybody who registered, along with the slides as well. And at this point, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put those in the chat. We also don't have a huge group here, so if you want to raise your hands, we can do it that way as well if it's just too long of a question to try to type out.
Hey, Katie, I don't really have any questions. Just want to say it was a great presentation, and I can't wait to see this kind of moving forward.
Thank you, Alan.
Katie, this is Jan Fadley with Roland Park. You mentioned land usage and zoning. I personally think that it might be a benefit to look at resources that could help communities, and in particular smaller communities. I know we're looking at redoing all of our codes and also looking at zoning. And I think it's a challenge with new people coming on council every couple of years to have any kind of continuity with a longer view as to where the community wants to go. And so I just thought I'd throw that in the mix. I don't know if everyone would benefit from that, but I know in particular the smaller communities in Northeast Johnson County would.
Thank you, Jan. That is good feedback to have as we're developing those resources. We have one question in the chat. Dean Catterndall, any thoughts on the timeline of the preliminary work and then the full, I think he's saying regional housing fund?
Evan, do you want to take this or do you want me to attempt? Sure, I will take it. So I think what we are planning now for this pilot fund, it of course depends on ability to raise necessary capital, but at least the pilot fund around 2 years, and starting once we get an initial amount to make those investments in the, initial 2 to 4 projects. So then, hopefully if everything goes well and we're learning our lesson and testing our model, then the full launch of the fund year 2.5, or Evan's shaking his head. So yes.
Yeah, that's that. When we look at other examples of other communities that have done similar things, because nobody's quite done this, but there have been other REITs used for affordable housing. Obviously, private equity has used this structure and continues to adopt this structure every year. It takes about 2 years to build the track record, or I shouldn't say 2 years, but it takes a while to build the track record to say, okay, this is the investment strategy, and we do have enough deal flow, we can build up enough investment, and the team is set, and all of those things to then go out and really attract a large amount of capital to scale the operation. And so, I think what Amanda said is right. We got to prove it out. We got to sort of pilot a little bit, and then, I really don't think there's a lack of housing demand or a lack of developer need in the community to really, deploy that much capital. And then over the course of time, we will reinvest. The fund will reinvest as to continually recycle investment into the community.
And just to reiterate too, when we say test the model, the REIT model for housing has been done. That's proven. That's not some unknown factor. But when we say test the model, we mean, test our specific assumptions for here locally with the number and types of projects that we can invest in and at what level. But just to reassure people too, that this model has been done in other parts of the country. It's well established, it's well trusted, it's well known. It's just that this is the first time here in Kansas City that it's been done for affordable housing and a mix of types of housing. Do you have anything to add, anything to that, Evan, or is that clear?
No,
okay.
No, yeah, that was good.
Okay, there are no more questions in the chat. Final ask if anybody has questions. Okay, well, thank you again for being here. As I said, we will be sending out the recording of this as well as the slides, and Amanda will also be posting this recording onto the www.kcrhp.org website.
Thank you.